All right, let's review Once Human, shall we? The game officially launched this week. I have played an ungodly amount over the past 4 days, coupled with my time during the beta, and I'm a little over 150 hours at this point, which pretty much speaks for itself. I wouldn't have sunk anywhere remotely close to that amount of time had I not been enjoying a lot of what I was playing. Though I do have plenty of critiques for parts of the game, and there's definitely room for improvement. Overall, though, I like Once Human. I like it about 150 hours worth. Man, boy, I have been gaming recently, let me tell you. It's a combination of multiple things from some of my favorite genres into a single package and put into the shared open world with other people. And yeah, I've just been having a good time, flat out. Funny enough, this is like the inverse situation to the recently released First Descendant, where with that game, I got why people liked it, but it just wasn't clicking for me. Here with Once Human, I totally understand why people won't like this one, but I am having a lot of fun. Subjectivity strikes once again, yeah? All right, so if you happen to miss my prior coverage, or if this is the first time you're hearing about the game, I wanna start with a basic overview, after which we'll go over my impressions, what I like, what I dislike, give some feedback. I'm also gonna be covering some of the issues that cropped up around launch, the dreaded privacy policy, and seasons, question mark? What's that all about? Okay, let's get into it. Starting with the basics. So Once Human at its core is a shared open world looter shooter MMO-lite survival game with a supernatural twist. It's quite a mouthful, but the game is very much a blending of different things. In fact, that's a large part of what I've enjoyed. Structurally, the open world reminds me of The Division or Defiance. You've got one seamless open space you can freely explore with no loading screens, aside from when you fast travel or enter instant dungeons. Other than that, it is a fully open play space with tons of stuff to do and other people running around. So after the initial tutorial, the main story quest takes you along the narrative, of course, but also introduces you to the game's many different systems and features. This starts with the basics of survival, because this game is also a survival game. You'll gather some wood and stone, build a camp, craft yourself some basic weapon, consumables, and some ammo before sending you off to engage with the many activities and things there are to do in the open world. And this is where the game really starts feeling a lot more like that MMO-y looter shooter, right? So strongholds, this is one big standout. Every single zone will have anywhere from like 4 to 6 of these. Typically, they're quite large locations with a very specific setting and theme. So for example, you've got hospitals, coastal towns, factories, research facilities, farms, military compounds, mountain villages, the list goes on and on. These areas are not only big, named, and visually distinct, but they also come with their own set of objectives. These can vary somewhat, but typically when you enter any stronghold, it's going to ask you to kill a certain number of enemies, loot, armor, weapon, and mystical chest in the area, and activate the Rift Anchor, which itself will give you valuable rewards, but also helps you progress to the next major boss fight, which brings us to the Monolith bosses. These are pinnacle encounters that you work towards by progressing the main story quest and clearing most of the strongholds in every zone. Technically, you don't actually need to clear the strongholds, you just need to collect the Rift Anchors, but they're located in the strongholds and you want to clear those anyways because they get valuable rewards as well as experience. But yes, you progress the story, you reach a point where it asks you to get these Rift Anchors at the strongholds. Once that's complete, you've unlocked that area's Monolith fight. These are big bosses, what I would call almost raid-like encounters with various mechanics and different phases. It's some of the more difficult content in the game currently, although this might change will change in the future as the season progresses and we get things like hard modes and new content types. But there are these Monolith bosses. These are like the big challenge as of now. Currently, there are 3 of them that we can fight. The first one is the Foul Shadow Hunter, this like twisted mutant with a massive gun mounted to one arm. He summons ads, shoots rockets, and spews out pools of poison. Then there is the Treant, this huge, almost dinosaur-like creature that's like combined with a tree and has a girl on its head riding its back or something. This one summons giant tentacle branches, spits out bubbles, and shoots a laser beam. And then there is Oraxium, a massive spider lady with big sweeping attacks. She shoots webs, sprays mist, and summons hordes of mini spiders. Now, there are at least 2 additional Monolith bosses that we know of from playing the betas, and these will be unlocked in the coming phases as Season 1 progresses, and hopefully we'll get even more of these Monolith boss fights because it is some of the harder challenge, but also some of the more interesting PvE content in the game. But there's also silos, which are basically this game's version of dungeons. You'll find their entrance out in the open world. There's usually side quests pointing you in the direction. Once you arrive, you can load into an instant version of the silo with multiple difficulty tiers to choose from. There is solo, and later you unlock group and hard modes. The dungeons themselves, the silos, are pretty straightforward. You move through corridors and rooms, looting, eliminating basic enemies, enemies, taking on elites, and then fighting some sort of a boss at the end. Those bosses not as substantial as the Monolith boss encounters, but they can still put up a bit of a fight. Silos are farmable content. There's even an option to instantly re-enter once you finish, and they give nice rewards for account and gear progression. Also, most of the silos will have these optional secret boss encounters that you can find by straying off of the main path at a certain point. So you've got the strongholds, the big bases, almost Ubisoft style areas to clear. You've got the Monolith pinnacle boss battles. You've got the silos, which are like dungeons. Beyond that, there are quite a few other types of points of interest in the open world. Every single region will have one major town. These towns will have a similar assortment of NPC quest givers and vendors for you to interact with. There's also a ton of smaller enemy camps. They're like condensed versions of the strongholds dotted all around the map. They usually consist of at least a couple of buildings, a few different areas. They aren't as large and also don't have the associated quest, but these areas are still worth exploring. They've got good loot, and they can also many times have elite enemies, which are always worth killing for their rewards. And then there's teleportation towers in the game scattered all about. You actually have to go up to and physically unlock these before you can use them, but yes, it does have fast travel as an option. Outside of those major points of interest content types, there's a metric ton of world events. There's just so much variety of things to see and do. This has actually played a very large role in what I've enjoyed about the game. So it's a mixture of static and dynamic content that you're gonna find all over the place. Here's a rundown of just some of it. You'll see fog events, these areas where fog will roll in out of nowhere. Entering it starts this timer that begins a challenge, usually to kill some mini boss or waves of enemies. There are jumping puzzles. You're gonna see these purple glowing shards randomly out in the world. Walking over to it begins an event, spawning another shard somewhere nearby. Finding and collecting all of the shards will spawn a loot chest. There are roaming bosses like the spider bus that stomps through the streets, houses that lift up and walk around, or space whales. There's also large world bosses at certain of the strongholds, like the giant flowerhead boss that's found in the stadium at Overlook Town. There are also public group events. These will appear every so often throughout the day. There's things like the disco event, where you have to shoot floating disco balls with a group of players. There's Dig to Hell, this mine that you have to defend NPC miners against hordes of enemies swarming in. There's the swamp event, where you have to defeat these big swamp monsters, and that's just to name a few. There are quite a lot of different public group events. Also, all of these particular kinds of events will have these heroic legendary modes that can be activated if you meet certain conditions while participating in it. There's also PvP events if you're into the PvP thing. We've seen things like Cargo Shuffle. This truck drives around the map blaring music. Every once in a while it stops and jellyfish pop out, attaching themselves to the heads of players and triggering open world PvP for all who are participating. There's also that space whale that I mentioned. You'll just see this whale flying above the map, and it drops these orbs periodically. If you pick up one of the orbs, you're actually flagged for PvP. You can't fast travel. The goal at this point is to get the orb back to your base and put it in the resonator, in which it turns into Star Crom, which is like a primary resource for endgame progression, which we'll get to. There's also these things called the Prime War. Now, this isn't available as of now in the current live version, but it will be coming as the season progresses, and we've seen it in action due to all of our time sunk in the beta test. So these are basically large-scale fights against those Monolith bosses, but there's a twist. Instead of being these instance encounters that you do solo or with a group of players, they actually spawn in the open world, and they're much more difficult. They're going to appear in certain occupied warband territories around the map. When this happens, your warband, which is basically like your guild, has to set up defenses to defend your base and break the armor of this super buffed version of the Monolith boss fights. And those are just some examples of the different world and public events. On top of that, the game has a ton of different like secrets and mysteries. This is where a lot of the supernatural elements come into play that remind me so much of games like The Secret World or Control. So you've got things like memory puzzles, riddles, secret codes, treasure hunts of all sorts. You might come across a ghost who gives you clues to help find something that they lost, and then you're gonna have to figure out what they're asking for and search the surrounding area. You're gonna find cameras randomly out in the world. Interacting with them actually summons a mimic of yourself doing an emote. If you copy that emote, it completes the event and you get a reward. You'll sometimes see traffic cones laying around in a pattern. Standing inside of those actually will highlight a nearby nearby broken signs, something say like a billboard, and then if you pull out your camera and line up these two separate pieces, you can make the sign appear whole again and get a reward. Or you might see a bunch of lily pads on a body of water. Jumping on them lights them up. Going from one lily pad to another lights them all and completes the event. Occasionally while running around, you'll see a notification that you're near a ripple in space-time, and then you can proc this by snapping your fingers. Now this mechanic is used in some of the story progression. It's also used to highlight nearby collectibles and loot chests, or in these ripple in space-times, if you snap your fingers, it will reveal certain hidden side quests and events like a nearby loot crate or an invisible mini-boss. The game just has like so many little interesting, nice touches like these that have made exploring and spending time in the world really enjoyable for me. So again, it's a large part of what I've enjoyed. So you've got all this variety of stuff in addition to the main story and side quests. You're clearing the strongholds, you're doing the silo dungeons, you're fighting the monolith bosses, but on top of that, there's a whole nother layer of this being a survival crafting game as well. So there are numerous survival mechanics. You've got a stamina bar for running, jumping, dodging, and harvesting. You've also got these sanity, hydration, and hunger meters. You'll have to eat and drink to keep up your hunger and hydration meters, and having them above a certain threshold, as these meters are broken up into quadrants. If they're in the highest threshold, you get big boosts to things like your move speed, your health, damage, and various other buffs. But there's also the sanity system. So while you're in certain areas, a lot of times it's the supernatural spots, like spending time in contamination zones, fighting certain enemies, but also if you eat bad food or drink polluted water, all of these things will deplete your sanity. So your max health actually gets reduced in direct proportion to the amount of sanity that you've accumulated. And if you drop below 50% sanity, you are at half health, but also you start getting various random debuffs that can be they're debuffs. They're very not helpful. So there are certain items that allow you to regain sanity, or you can even rest in a bed. There's also gear sets in the game with large amounts of sanity depletion resistance, but this is just like another survival mechanic to interact with, and it's actually rather interesting and plays into the setting of the game. There's also full-on base building, so you start by placing a territory. This can be put pretty much anywhere in the world. Really, the only restriction is you can't put one too close to a stronghold or in certain terrain, like on roads, but otherwise you can build a base pretty much anywhere. In fact, you will see that when you're playing, that there are player bases all over the environment, out in the woods, off the side of towns, just everywhere you go, you're going to see player bases. Now, once you place your territory, you can then start building a base. You've got the basic structural templates you can put down for floors, walls, ceilings, roofs, stairs, windows, and doors. There are facilities with stations for crafting, storage, fortifications, and power generation. And then there's also customization, like you can place down furniture and wallpapers for decorating the environment. They are pretty generous with the building. It really doesn't take much time to be able to construct like a sizable base. And after you've built a base, you can actually freely relocate it whenever, so long as the new spot you're putting it doesn't overlap with another player's territory or isn't in one of those restricted areas. You can move the whole thing at any point. It's just got a 10-minute cooldown, but that's it. You can just move your base around the world as you continue to progress. There's also a camping system. You can put down this little mini camp anywhere. This lets you craft basic food, tools, and ammo, but also primarily it acts as a extra respawn point for if you die. So oftentimes when you come up to a stronghold or a boss fight, you're going to see a bunch of other player camps lying around as a insurance in case they die during that content. And of course, there's gathering system to go along with all this. You'll get resources for base building as well as crafting. You'll have to gather all the usual fare here. There's various types of trees, ores, rocks, herbs, flowers, fruits, vegetables, and animals to be gathered, harvested, and processed in service of building your base and making consumables and crafting your gear, which then brings us to progression. So the primary form of gear power progression in this game is done via crafting. There are gear drops in the game, like you're gonna randomly find pieces of armor and weapons, but they are rare and they're really only used as a stopgap while you're working on your crafted pieces. Like you might find a higher rarity weapon and a different type of weapon than what you're currently using or what you can craft, and you'll use it for a bit before it breaks eventually through use, but it just lets you try something else. Really, once human, gear progression, getting gear and the gear that you're going for, the most important stuff, the best sets, everything, it all revolves around this blueprint system. So as you play, you'll discover both armor and weapons blueprints. You'll find these doing the many points of interest like the strongholds, and also by completing certain like main and side story quests. Now, once you get a blueprint, you can then take materials that you've gathered and craft the item. There's also a subsystem of blueprint fragments where after you can make an item, you can then take fragments of similar blueprints or of the same blueprints that you got for that item, and you can use them to power up your existing blueprints. There's like a whole star rating system. If I get a blueprint for a gun that I like, I'll have the blueprint, I can craft the gun. But if I find more blueprints of that same gun, I can fuel those into it to increase its star rating, which is just across the board, it's better. You got 1, I think up to 5 stars that you can eventually get it up to. Now, beyond those blueprints that you initially find that are rewarded by going through, clearing the zones and doing those quests, the other and the major form of end game, the way you're getting blueprints, is done via the wish machine. This is a device that drops random blueprints, and it works almost exactly like most gacha or loot box systems. You spend a currency, you push a button, and then you see what the machine spits out. Now, this is the primary way of late game power progression, as there's only a set number of blueprints that are rewarded from playing. Beyond that, everything else that you're getting is going to come out of the wish machine, and a lot of those higher rarity, unique items and set items are also coming out of the wish machine. Now, the currency that's used is called Starcrom, and the only way of getting that is via playing, at least currently. You get it by completing certain activities. There are various weekly lockouts and reward tracks that reward it. And then also there's this thing called the Stardust Resonator, which is a whole nother system. It's a base defense, basically, base defense mini game that rewards you up to a set amount of Starcrom every week. So beyond building your base to make it look pretty and hold all of your facilities, you're also going to want to set up defenses. You'll put down barricades, lay traps, and turrets of all kinds in preparation for doing this base defense mode. So how it works is you build a Stardust Resonator, you place it in your base, and then once you feel your defenses are good and you're ready, you put in these items called Cortexes into the Resonator. They will come in different levels, but basically the idea is the higher level the Cortex, the stronger it is, the more Starcrom you'll get, but also the harder the hordes of enemies will be. You choose the difficulty, you choose the timing, you choose when you want this to happen, and once you start, you got a few minutes to fend off these invading enemies. Doing so without them attacking and destroying your Resonator will grant you Starcrom for spending on that blueprint RNG machine. Another big part of progression is the Cradle. This is the backpack that you have on you at all times and is tied to a lot of your character and crafting progression. So first, for the crafting progression is the Memetics. This is a progression tree to unlock various aspects of base building and crafting. As you play, doing activities and leveling up will unlock Memetic points. You then spend those points in any of 5 categories depending on what unlocks you want for the crafting progression. There's also the Cradle Override. These provide powerful passive buffs that enhance your combat capabilities, doing things like increasing damage for certain weapon types that you use. And then there is the Memetic Mastery system, where every 5 levels you're granted a random assortment of 4 different abilities or powers or unlocks to choose from. You pick one, and these vary from letting you make stronger harvesting tools to getting more resources from your crafting stations or unlocking entirely new unique recipes for consumables or items or what have you. Lots of cool customization to choose from in this system. Now there's the Deviations. These are basically pets that you collect while playing, and these unlock special powers and buffs for you and your territory. Deviations can be found from following through the campaign, completing quests, fishing, doing public events and dungeons. Sometimes you're also gonna just find them floating around in the open world and you have to capture them, sort of like Pokemon. Now, whenever you collect a Deviant, you then have to place it in a glass case inside of your base. After that, you can inspect the Deviant to learn what makes them happy and learn the specifics of what they do. And you'll want to adjust their surroundings accordingly to make sure that they're fully satisfied. So that they might ask you to change the temperature by making it hotter or colder. They might say they like certain sounds or music or a specific type of lighting, or they might like a certain kind of decor or objects to be nearby them. If you keep them satisfied and happy, ticking all of the boxes basically, they will be more productive and it will boost their unique effects. There are many different types of deviations that all help with something like territory management, combat, gadgets. They can gather resources for you. They're just helpful little pets that you basically have. It's pretty cool. There's also a mod system, pretty straightforward. You attach mods to the corresponding piece of gear and it gives you some bonus like increasing damage, your defenses, or your move speed. In the late game, this will really help you refine your build, tailoring to certain playstyle, to damage types, or giving you offensive or defensive enhancements, etc. Okay, so that's pretty much all of the major stuff there is to do and see and what is in Once Human, right? Now let's talk about what I like, what I dislike, the pros and the cons. So for starters, as I mentioned, generally I really like this game. I think it just boils down simply to it having the right combination of things that I've enjoyed from other games, but in a new package. It is a fresh version of things that I've really liked before. It reminds me so much of The Division, of Defiance, of Secret World, it's really cool. It's like it's a little bit open world, it's a little bit MMO, it's a little bit survival game, it's also a little bit supernatural thriller, horror, psychological, otherworldly, interdimensional stuff. It's a cool combination of things and I've liked it. It's just been a downright interesting world to spend time in. I also really enjoy the gameplay loop with all of the different variety and content and activities. After the tutorial, you're dropped into the world and you're probably going to want to follow the main quest line as it unlocks unlocks and introduces you to all of the systems. But what you do is pretty much up to you. Like, you could just focus right away on survival crafting, running around, hunting wildlife, gathering wood, stone, and ore, and then start building a base and placing down stations. You could spend your whole first day, 12 hours straight, not even progressing the main story and just like building your base and doing survival crafting stuff. Like, that's what you could do. Or you could do all the MMO-y looter shooter stuff. You could walk in any direction and will be guaranteed to stumble into something, a point of interest like a stronghold, where you could spend 30 to 60 minutes there, taking out all the enemies, collecting all of the loot and resources, opening the chest, fighting the elites. A lot of strongholds will even have side quests that are tied into the area that you will find as you're exploring that region. Or maybe you'll come across any of the numerous event types, like the fog rolls in, or you see the roaming spider bus sauntering down the road, or you find a jumping puzzle, or there's a ripple in space-time where you snap your finger and figure out what's there, or a ghost gives you a riddle to find their long-lost puppy or something. There's just like so much stuff everywhere, and it's great. I love the world, I love the setting, I love the sheer amount of things to do, and the fact that it's entirely open world and that there's other people running around. I also really like survival crafting games, and that is here too. Like, it's got the MMO-y open world stuff, plus full-on base building, which I've spent about a third of my time playing the game, just building bases in the various tests, and now here at launch. Simply put, you got all of these different things coming together into a package that I've just thoroughly enjoyed. There's also a lot of cool little touches and even hidden mechanics in the game. So many of those optional side quester missions require you actually figuring something out. Unless you just Google it, the game doesn't tell you explicitly what to do or where to go. Things like treasure hunting for weapon attachments, where you've got a vague map to try to figure out its location. Events like that camera emote mimic, the game doesn't tell you to copy the emote. You just see your character doing something and you're like, what was that? He stuck his tongue out at me. I don't understand. But if you do it back, you complete the event. There's also just tons of riddles you'll have to figure out for yourself because there are no map markers, nothing pointing you where to go and what to do. And also all of this, a lot of this is tied into like that interdimensional flair that just adds so much to the game. I just dig the environment. And then the whole Deviant system is really fun to engage with like every Deviant having its own unique benefits. Some help you in combat, they'll do different things, but also can even alter your attacks, giving you like special moves essentially. Some will help with gathering, like a woodchuck who cuts down trees, or the Minecraft guy who harvests ore, or a paper doll who will sweep your base and occasionally find hidden treasure under your bed. It's just a whole nother level and layer of systems. It's like having Pokemon in this MMO survival crafting game as well. There's also there's hidden mechanics, like there's a character weight system. So if you do or eat certain things, your character will gain weight. Now this has gameplay effects like slowing you down but making you sturdier, but then also your character physically gets larger in size, and then you can do things like eat expired food to expel, get sick, and lose the weight. But that's a system the game just never tells you about. It's just there. Another major positive, and much to my surprise, is that this game launched with no pay to win. It is a free-to-play loot game, and there's not a single means of purchasing power in the cash shop right now. None. In fact, I would actually say this is probably one of the more fair free-to-play loot games that I've ever played. Like, the only things you can spend real money for currently are cosmetics that are related to your character, like different looks for your character's outfit and weapons. But there's also a lot of base-related cosmetics, so specifically tons of different ways to make your base look really unique and different are only available in the cash shop. There is a battle pass. Now, the free tier does have like power-related currencies and stuff, but that is free. Everyone gets it. Everything on the paid track is just cosmetic. And there is a sub called the Meta Pass, but that also only rewards cosmetic. There's just nothing tied to power or progression that you can spend money to get. Nothing at all. Now, the game does have two big power gates, and that comes in the form of the Star Chrom and the controllers. As I mentioned, Star Chrom is the currency that you use for getting blueprints out of the wish machine, and this is going to be one of your main power gates, is getting those rare blueprints to first of all have the armor or weapon, but then also to enhance the ones that you have. And the controllers are consumables that you get a limited amount of while playing, and they're basically like keys that you use at the end of dungeons or Monolith fights to get extra better rewards from completing that dungeon or that boss fight. If they ever let you pay for those, if they ever let you spend money to get Star Chrom or controllers, that will most certainly be in the realm of pay to win or pay to skip. There's also a lot of time gating that's in the game that they could potentially sell bypasses for in the future, but as of now, they're not. You can't buy Star Chrom, you can't buy controllers, and you can't spend money to skip any of the gates. I've been playing and grinding this game nonstop since it came out, and at no point have I ever felt the need to spend money on anything because there's nothing tied to my progression that's available for purchase. It's all just visual customization, and I don't really care. All right, so those are all the pros. There's a lot. Generally, overall, I like this game, but there are some cons. In fact, these are pretty big for a lot of people. Some of the stuff I'm going to to mention here will keep people from enjoying or even wanting to try the game out in the first place. I'm also going to include some suggestions and feedback for these as well to see if they can improve it. All right, number one con, the difficulty. It's not there. This game is incredibly easy across the board, like roll your face across the keyboard levels of easy. Outside of a very few specific forms of content, like the Monolith bosses, if you're at or below level, or the base defense if you're solo, outside of that, most every other combat encounter is a total breeze. Like the hardest thing about this game at times is if you let your sanity drop too low and it scales down your max health 1-for-1. So if you got 50% sanity, you only have half your health, and you might find yourself in a situation where all of a sudden you die in 1-2 hits. But really, for the most part, combat is not a challenge in this game. Don't come here if you're looking for difficult combat encounters. That's not what you get. I spent most of the past few days like min-maxing my gear as we wait for the start of phase 2. It was super unnecessary. Everything was dying super easily. Now it's even more of a joke. In fact, once phase 2 starts, I'm going to be able to immediately start crafting the next tier of gear, which will quickly bypass all of my fine-tuned gear that I've spent hours calibrating thus far. There are harder modes of content that are coming. There are literal like hard and challenge modes that are being added to the game, as well as those open world versions of the Monolith bosses. But even the hardest stuff in the game isn't very hard for very long. At least that was the case in the multiple beta tests that we've played. Maybe that's changed for now. My suggestion, add more challenging open world content. Maybe even just a hard mode to the open world. Some trigger that you can flip that makes the open world less face roll, and more hard end game content. Because again, as I mentioned, it doesn't stay hard for very long, at least based on what we saw in the beta test. We'll see if it's any different here as the phases progress through launch. The number 2 con here is the game can feel quite floaty. I would say the movement and melee in particular. I think the shooting feels fine, especially actually first-person shooting. I toggle to first person a lot because in first person, you just have to line up your target, right, with where your gun's pointed. Whereas if you're playing in third person, you have to deal with the spread effect of your shots. First-person shooting actually feels fine, but the movement of your character as you navigate the environment, as you climb up onto things, and especially the melee, it's just super floaty. Like, I don't know if it's latency compensation. It probably is, to be honest, but it can feel very rough at times. Your character just finds itself kind of drifting around a lot. The melee has never felt good, and that really hasn't gotten any better here for launch. Suggestion here, make it less floaty. I don't know what you can do. Maybe something. The third big thing, and this is going to be a huge sticking point for a lot of people, is that this game runs on seasons. It's a seasonal structure. Every season lasts only 6 weeks. It's like the shortest time span of any seasonal game I've ever played. And I know for sure, and I've seen this, a lot of people hate it, especially anyone who wants longer term progression. You're going to be grinding and playing for hours, unlocking all this stuff. It's going to reset every 6 weeks. Well, not exactly. You do carry a lot of things over, like your base can be saved as a blueprint that you can place down when a new season starts. And all of the blueprints for the weapons and armor that you've got, those will stay with you. But when a new season starts, you do reset from scratch. You start at level 1 and you have to recollect the materials and re-progress through the season to put everything back together. So you have your base, you have your blueprints, but you're going to have to get everything to put it back together if you play a second season. Now, every season is supposed to be adding its own unique twist with new types of content, new bosses, and even new areas. But as of now, we really don't know if that's going to feel worth the reset in progression and you having to regrind every 6 weeks. Frankly, I expect that I'm going to be done with the game after my first playthrough, but for people who are wanting to play for months, I totally understand why some people aren't going to like the seasonal thing. And that goes along with this seasons is how they dole it out. It's just fairly limited to start. Like, I was basically done with the first phase of the season the first week after around 20 hours, and I spent most of my time since then building and min-maxing my gear, which, as I said, wasn't really necessary. There's just nothing to do. I reached the end of the story content and the end of the zones that I could explore after 20 hours. Now, that said, I'm a gamer and that's my job. So most people working full time, having a family, whatever it is that's taking up your time, right? Going to school, about 20 hours in a week to clear all the content. That's probably fitting nicely in line with the rest of the things that they're doing in their life. But if you are a no-life gamer, if you're someone like me, 20 hours, that guy, I worked through that in like a day, bro. Come on. No, but seriously, the 6-week resets, the server resets, I think are going to turn people off. As I said, though, I'm just here to enjoy my experience, right? I don't need things to last in perpetuity in these games. I'm going to play. I will have the experience that I have. I will enjoy it like I've been enjoying it. If it resets in 6 weeks, I probably won't be coming back to the game anyways. Or maybe I will. Maybe I'll play 1 or 2 seasons, but I suspect that'll be the most of it. But if you're looking for one long-term game and you don't like the idea of progress being reset, even if you do carry some things over every 6 weeks, that's going to be a major turnoff for a lot of people. Totally get that, right? Another thing that I don't really love about the game is the fact that a lot of the gear and power progression is all tied to the random dice roll of that loot box machine, the wish machine. I don't love it. I wish they just like let you farm bosses and things to make stuff. I wish it all wasn't tied behind this loot boxy gacha system, even though they don't let you pay real money for it. I'd rather just farm bosses for loot than farm for a currency that's capped per week and get a certain number of spins from a box machine every week. I just don't love the presentation of that. It is unique, I guess, and I guess randomness is randomness. Randomness from a boss is not like, how much different is randomness from killing a boss from randomness from spinning a machine, but you had to kill a boss to let you spin the machine, right? I get it, but it's just, I prefer to just kill the boss and get my whatever 5% chance to get a piece of gear than do the whole machine thing, right? Especially since the potential for them selling StarCrom in the future does exist. As long as they have StarCrom tied to a Gamba machine that is where you get most of your power, they're just one step away from turn the game pay to win just like that, right? Like, it's not happened yet, but it could happen. Don't love it for that reason. Oh, and one thing I absolutely hate about this game is, my God, the amount of menus and sub-menus, all about like layers and layers of tracking progress with achievements that you have to manually interact with. It's crazy. Let me tell you what I'm talking about, right? Here are the number of different menus and tracking systems. It's nuts. So first there is the journey. This tracks about just about everything you do in the game, from combat to gathering, crafting, survival, base building, etc. You do the stuff, you complete the objectives, like backstab enemies 5 times, cook a rare food, build and lay in a bed, etc., etc. This will give you rewards. It gives you controllers, it gives you StarCrom, energy links, and XP. You have to go into the journey menu and interact with it to get this stuff. But then there's also the season goal menu with its own objective tracking for certain tasks, similar to the above, like base building, exploring, and fighting. That rewards season-specific currency for cosmetics. There is Mayfly's fantastic journey, not the same as the other journey. This is a different journey. This menu also tracks tasks for you to complete in combat, survival, territory, rewarding currencies and consumables. There is an event tab that rewards you for making friends and engaging in things like Twitch drops. There are these things called regular events, like the Astral Duelits that you accumulate daily and is used to buy consumables. There's a community events tab with bonuses rewarded for you linking every single social media site to the game that gives you additional benefits. There's the Discord one, a whole separate tab for linking your Discord to the game that gives rewards. There's then the Battle Pass with that free and premium track. Again, you have to interact with us to get the rewards. Every single one of these, beyond like linking your social media accounts, are just play the game, like fight, gather, craft, do tasks, and then get a currency, resource, consumable as a reward, but divided into 8 separate menus that you have to interact, manually click through, and sub menus and go into that menu. Like, it's just like too much. It's so unnecessarily convoluted. If you want to reward me for playing the game, just give me rewards as I play the game. Having 8 different menus and sub-menus to interact with, it is way too much. Even having 1 or 2 things. Like, if they had 1 or 2 progress trackers that you had to interact with to collect rewards for completing all these different objectives, that's fine. They have 8 of them. 8 different menus for just playing the game and completing a checklist. It's just, I hate it. I really hate it. I don't understand why there's 8 of these. I don't get it. There was a bunch of other issues, like in launch day in particular, they had this problem, and it wasn't a bug. People are saying it's a bug. It wasn't a bug because they were explicitly saying before launch you can only make 1 character on 1 server. Surprise, people started complaining. People jumped in the game, they made a character, they wanted to try it out, and then their friend joins, they make a character, but they did it on a different server. You couldn't make a second character anywhere, ever. So you just couldn't play with your friend if you accidentally ended up on 2 servers. Whoops, sorry about that. They quickly addressed it. I think actually that got patched the same day, launch day, like immediately. So good on them for that. Another big issue that's resulted in a lot of review bombing and complaints online is the end user license agreement, the privacy policy in Once Human. People are pointing to parts of it and saying they're stealing my data. From all of the research I've done, there was a nice write-up and video put out by Pirate Software. I would suggest checking that out if you want further clarification. From everything I've read and seen, this isn't much different than any other privacy policy that you see in any game. People are particularly fearful of some of the data tracking and holding on of information that they're doing. But again, from everything I've seen and read, this seems like a not issue. It seems like it's just in line with pretty much every other privacy policy that you see out there. I could be wrong though, and maybe this privacy policy is in fact going to have someone steal your identity. Really, my answer for this is I'm just not putting any personal information in towards the game. I'm not submitting any personal details, name, whatever, you know? I'm playing the game through Steam, partially for this reason, to just not have to worry about it. And another one, which is kind of more minor, but really not, key mapping is limited for some reason. There's lots of things that they do let you rebind the keys, but there are just very certain specific things that they don't. I don't understand why. Like, why go halfway in on key remapping? Why let us remap 90% of the keys, but then have 10% that you're like, oh, can't remap this one? Don't understand. So they suggestion here, just let's key remap everything. You got 90% of the way there, get the last 10%, right? Now, those complaints, like I said, there are some or all of these that are gonna keep people away from the game, but overall, these worries, these concerns, these complaints have not been enough to stop me from enjoying it. I've just been having such a good time. I had a great time during the beta test, and now playing again at launch, I'm having a blast, getting to finally play with all of my friends. We're building up bases next to each other, we're doing content together, and I just love the world, the content type. I love this combination of things, the MMO, the open world, the looter shooter stuff, the survival crafting, and all put in this world with all this supernatural horror stuff. It's just really cool. I've been having a great time. I really enjoy Once Human. Doesn't hurt as well that it's a free-to-play looter game that launched with no pay to win. That could, of course, change in the future, but as of today, as of this recording, there's no pay to win to speak of. You're all just buying cosmetics, right? So that's pretty phenomenal. Hats off to them. They lived up to their word. They launched with no pay to win. I'm not ruling out that they let you buy StarCrom or controllers in the future, or let you pay to skip some of those weekly time gates that the game has. That could certainly happen a few months to a year from now, but it's not happening now, and now is when I'm enjoying the game. So, all right by me. Great. That's it for today. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this review of Once Human. I'm having a good time. I'm liking it. Gonna keep on playing. At least play through the first season. That's my plan here. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks. I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy.